Herald Sun, they're diverse. Some of them are young, some of them are old, some of them are rich, some of them are poor, some of them speak English as a first language, some of them don't. Some of them are buying the market to buy sunglasses and most of them aren't. Some of them are in the market to renovate their kitchen and most of them aren't. So why would you spend a fortune to run a 30-second ad on Channel 9 in prime time when you could run the same ad 50 times on the Discovery Channel or on the Lifestyle Channel or on the whatever channel the people that you're interested in are tuned into? Why would you spend a fortune taking out a full-page ad in the Sydney Morning Herald, again, in case, unless you're Woolworths or Coles or someone that's selling groceries or something that lots of people can buy, why would you take out a full-page ad that hundreds of thousands of people that aren't interested in your product are going to read, when instead you could go and find a website or a magazine or some other advertising conduit that takes you straight to the demographic that's interested in your product? Now, what's this got to do with politics? Heaps. How do you sell 1 million newspapers to inner city? Well, by not pissing off half of the electorate. Once upon a time, newspapers wanted to look balanced because they didn't want to offend and isolate huge numbers of readers. The media created the idea of being this honest broker sitting in the middle, saying, well, if Labor says something stupid, I'll say it. If Liberal says something stupid, I'll say it, because I want people to buy my newspaper, and I want as many people as possible to buy my newspaper. But these days, there's a more profitable strategy, and Fox News are the archetypical version in the US. Advertisers are willing to pay more per eyeball on Fox than they are on CBS because the demographic is known. A bunch of old conservatives. Now, Serena won't let me tell you what the main product I like to advertise to a bunch of old conservatives is. But you can imagine there's a whole bunch of advertisers that would really want to talk to a bunch of older people and not want to talk to a bunch of younger people. Similarly, there's a whole bunch of advertisers that want to talk to a bunch of young people that don't want to talk to a bunch of old people. So it's actually far more profitable for the media to chop themselves up, to balkanise their readership into young progressives and old conservatives, or old progressives and young conservatives, and send different content down different pipes designed to cheer up whoever they're talking to, and then go to an advertiser and say, hey, if you want to talk to 18 to 34-year-olds that are conservative, I'm for you. So why am I telling you all this? Because the media didn't set out to be balanced because it cared about democracy. I hate to tell you. The media set out to be balanced because that was a good marketing strategy. Buy my newspaper, I want 1 million people to buy my newspaper, and if 1 million people buy my newspaper, I'll make a lot of money from advertising, and the only way to sell 1 million papers is to be relatively balanced. Well, there's a new idea now. It's called bugger balance. You know, if there's a demographic of people that think the moon's made out of cheese, the demographic of people that think, that every climate scientist in the world is in on a conspiracy, then I should set up a little conduit and I should build 30, 50 or 100,000 people that tune into that every day or every week. And then I'll go sell advertising to go talk to those people and I'll make more money. So my point in bringing this up is we have to be really careful in thinking that the only problem with the media is sort of the rise of the internet and the loss of advertising revenue. And there's lots of other pressures that the media are putting, that the internet is putting on journalists, including timeliness, and the main way that newspapers are responding is by spending less collecting news, not more, which means that the journalists have to write 8 stories a day, not 2, which means that none of those stories can possibly be as good or as detailed. Yes, but I guess I'm assuming that people have already heard those arguments. But I think you have to understand that in an environment where there's now, how many free-to-air TV stations are in Australia? Or channels, not stations? 20? I don't know. Some of you must know. I don't. Heaps more than 3. Remember when 3 was the right number? 15? All right, it's going to get bigger, it's going to get bigger, and every time it gets bigger, the audience gets smaller. Okay? And the opportunity for a television station to say, I'm your kind of station, tune in, watch my news, it's freaky. mind, but it's the kind of freaky that cheers you up. It'll focus on just the things that you're interested in. And having done that, my next port of call is to go to the advertiser and say, you want the freaky people? You want the ones that are obsessed with this issue? You can customise the copy in your ad. I'll tell you what their prejudices are. So yes, classified advertising and revenue is a big part of the problem. Yes, the need for newspapers to pump out stories all day long so their online sites are topical is a problem. Yes, all these things, but also my point is, let's remember that the media have always been powerful and influential in our democracy. And at every point in time, people have questioned the motives of media proprietors, not just in Australia, but around the world. And their motivation primarily has been to get themselves rich. But there was this fluke, there was this nice period of history where the way that the media made itself rich was to be relatively balanced. And that was nice. And I grew up in it. But the market circumstances are changing, and in turn, the motivations and the strategies of people who own newspapers is changing. And when you overlay that, as I said, with the big list of things that our major political parties just don't want to talk about, I think you get to an answer, if not the answer, to why broadsheets have got narrow concerns. Now, I'll pretend that's exactly where I wanted to leave it, and open up to questions. Yep.
You mentioned a number of causes, but where does the big players in Australia, financial players like coal miners, who presumably must one way or another provide funds to political parties, and are they not too scared to go against their views?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that direct, donations by companies to political parties is part of the problem, and certainly a part that I think could and should be addressed. But again, let's look at the structural issues. If I donate $250,000 to the Labor Party and $250,000 to the Liberal Party, I haven't helped either of them. Think about it. Neither of them is now advantaged over each other. It's a zero-sum game for the combatants. But they both are now beholden to me, which is nice. So why would political parties who know this, who know it's largely a zero-sum game, especially the bigger corporate donors, just chuck $100,000 here, $100,000 there. It's important, but it's not as important as we think when you realise that both parties are then spending this, their increased fundraising on the same weapons. All right, always got to think, who's fueling the arms race? Well, I think so. So we have to understand that net effect, but we also have to understand, and this doesn't get enough analysis by a long shot, those donations empower a subset of people within the political parties. All right, if I'm the guy or girl who receives the checks for the hundreds of thousands of bucks, and if I'm the guy or girl who then has some relative increase in power within the party, because, hey, look, I'm the guy or girl that brings the cash, my relative position in my party is enhanced, even though the absolute power of my party is unchanged. So, I think for anyone, Labor or Liberal Party member or Greens member, anyone who's interested in empowering individuals to participate more in their party processes, you've got to realise that really one of the main games, or one of the main roles of these big donations, is to reinforce a power structure within the political party. And I don't think that is well enough understood, because go to a poll and 90%, 95% of people will say, let's get rid of corporate donations. And funnily enough, and in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that in the second reading speeches for the introduction of publicly funded election campaign, in the second reading speech, the minister proposing it actually said, step one is public funding and step two is we're going to scrap all the donations. And funnily enough, we never made it to step two. All right, 90% of people want it. It's one of those things that, in terms of my list, has got a big black line through it. And that's probably a different black line, and that is that some people in your party, as opposed to your parliamentary wing, say, you know, don't touch that one. So yes, we need to address those donations, but I think we need to better understand what are the power relationships that are the barrier to do something about it. Because, you know, there are plenty of companies. There are some companies that don't want to pay it. They feel they have to. Right? There's plenty of members of political parties don't like it. There's plenty of voters don't like it, and there's plenty of people in the media who say it's a big deal. But funnily enough, year after year, it just never quite makes it to the top of the to-do list. No more questions? Good? More thought?
I was going to ask about polling. We just seem to be chasing our tail with all these polls these days. Is there any way we can get rid of them?
I bet Julia Gillard wishes we got rid of polling. By the way, sorry, quick diversion. If anyone saw Four Corners on Monday night, and what a beat up, the poll that Gillard, who was in the day we started, the poll that was shown, the UMR poll, was track polling. My eyes weren't good enough to tell whether it was weekly or monthly or fortnightly. It was track polling. Right, with, you know, who do you like, Gillard or Rudd? So it clearly wasn't a poll that had just been asked for the first time that week in order to roll Rudd. It was track polling. It had been asked, you know, for a long period of time. Anyway, sorry, just makes me angry. Look, polling's important in a democracy. I want to know what people think. You know, I do. I started by talking about polling. I said most people, polls tell us again and again, people want certain things and don't get. Polling is important. With 23 million people, you're not going to ask everyone how they're feeling. Polling gives you an insight into what people think. But there's a fundamental difference between asking people what they think and obsessing about what they think about you. You know, the job of a leader is to lead, it's to make some decisions, and it's strange in this company perhaps, but hey, I'll launch a defence of John Howard here. John Howard was not a poll-driven politician. Right, the GST was not popular. Gun law reform was not popular in his constituency. The war in Iraq was not popular. And I think he might have heard on the grapevine that work choices stunk to high heaven. And he went to an election and lost. That is not a poll-driven politician. Yes, he was populist and was interested in polls on a wide range of issues that he didn't care that much about. And he was good at politics. He was good at saying, well, why am I taking pain on something I don't care about it? Everyone hates it, fix it. Sorry, Minister, that's embarrassing for you. Remember when Tony Abbott made his ironclad guarantee about Medicare or something or other, and then after the election, Howard said, oh, sorry, mate. No. You know, you go explain it. So Howard was populist and was interested in the polls, but let's be clear about it. The guy took some big calls that were exactly the opposite of the public mood, and he thought that was his job. I didn't like most, I was on the wrong side of all of those calls except for gun law reform. But he wasn't poll-driven, you know. And a whole bunch, here's the thing, a whole bunch of swinging voters that if you rang them and asked them, you know, about something would tell you the answer, well, they probably didn't care that much about the issue. A bunch of those swinging voters actually respected Howard because he seemed to be able to make big decisions and stick to them, even though they disagreed with him. So I don't mind polling. I think it's an important insight into what people want and what people think, but it's terrible to substitute polling for leadership. And it's terrible to substitute polling for strategy, because strategy is actually about thinking, well, some of the things I'm going to do are unpopular. Polling can help me get away with it, you know. But when you're just asking a random 1,000 people, what should we do? I think down that path madness lies. Yep.
Just getting back to when you said about the Australian public were progressive, and I think you're right about that, if they value fairness.
My first floating of that heresy, so thank you.
But I think they're also very vulnerable to the politics of fear.
Yeah.
And I think there are numerous examples of that. And one of them is Tony Abbott's thing about stop the votes and the higher taxes. They were two things that that were brought up endlessly, and we still didn't get a really good critique of those issues, even though he was continually bringing them up. Is that to be laid at the door of the media?
Oh, I think there's no doubt. Well, I think both major political parties, you know, there are elements in both major political parties who are happy to politicise